I'm Ellery. I'm from Global Voices, and a lot of you know us, but for those of you who don't, we are an international network of writers, bloggers, translators, and social media experts in many parts of the world, about 138 countries right now. We mostly write about the place either where we live or where we're from. And we have a staff that I'm on of about 30 professional editors and project managers. We produce our stories in about 20 languages, although most of our work happens originally in English, and we have translation in 36 languages. So the issue of misinformation, disinformation, false information is something that our community has become very familiar with over time. Our mission is to tell stories about communities and people who we see being either misrepresented or not really represented in our national or big mainstream global media conversation. And we use the internet, social media, citizen media as our main source bed. So our sweet spot for coverage tends to be human rights, social movements, and what we call digital rights, free expression and privacy online. We are real people. There's proof. That's from a recent meeting actually in France. So here's just a couple of examples of, there's our story, great. A couple of stories over the years that just to give you a sense of the range of ways in which we encounter the kinds of information and challenges that we're talking about today. So I wanted to talk about a couple of examples that we've seen that I think are compelling and important to bring to this conversation. One of them is China. So this is Beijing, and this is this fog or smog that you see here? It's smog. Until 2012, 2013, which is when this photo was taken, the conversation, the narrative put out by the Chinese government and state media about this was full of false information. In addition to a official line about this literally being fog and not smog, scientists, journalists, doctors, people who were trying to put out true facts about the quality of air were getting silenced, were losing their jobs. So social media commentary about this also would routinely get censored. So what were people to do? One solution from the US State Department was to start running the Beijing Air Twitter account, which would give you reliable readings of what the actual air quality was in a given day, but that actually contributed to a narrative about this being a foreign conspiracy. What worked? What ended up working and actually changing the narrative that has indeed shifted over the last couple of years was distributed effort by citizens, not necessarily talking or coordinating with one another, but finding ways to report on air quality, whether that was just expressing how you feel when you breathe, what your health status is, or actually in a number of cases, people built or pooled resources to buy testing tools where they actually tested air quality themselves and would report on that in a distributed fashion so that one person or powerful voice didn't have to take on all the responsibility for the message. There were also some sort of more risky efforts, such as the man who actually sued the government over smog and its health effects. And so what's happened is there has actually been a shift in the conversation and a shift in the official narrative about the air. And one of the things that our community thinks is most powerful about this is that the efforts focused on the effects of pollution, the health effects, not on the policies or the people that may have been responsible for it. So there's a long way to go there, but those kinds of efforts demonstrate a powerful shift. And so now Beijing is fighting war on pollution. So my second example comes from Turkey. And this, as you all might remember, the Gezi Park protests, when those really started to blow up in 2013, CNN Turk was not showing the protests. They were actually showing a documentary on penguins. And the penguins became a representation of misinformation and things that were not being said or that were being said instead of what seemed to be a really important piece of the news. Since then, Turkish journalists describe a culture war and a real war that has developed within the media space and between some media outlets and the state. And this has resulted in a lot of really serious silencing, people being jailed, news outlets being shut down, but also digital threats in the form of surveillance, censorship, and more. And I think that in all of what we're talking about here is incredibly important to be aware of the connection between mistrust in media and destabilization of trust in a media environment and censorship. 140 Journos, oh, I have 1 minute, okay, is a really interesting network that does citizen media type work in Turkey. They rely on a lot of volunteers and a few staff to do reporting that they talk about really wanting to cut through the culture war and to talk to people and talk about what is happening to people and to use that to build news. It sounds really obvious, but I think that it is actually hard to do, and it becomes sort of ever more important in an environment where people really feel like they cannot trust these different sources of power. And there's their website, which is also pretty cool looking. I loved this quote because it is not censorship, state pressure, or fake news is the chaff that constantly thrown out to keep the media distracted. That is the biggest threat to informing the public. Last example comes, oh no, okay, really, really, really fast. Comes from Mexico. Oh God, that's horrible. I'm so sorry. The problem of misinformation on social media is not something that just happens because somebody made a mistake or reported something wrong. There are many efforts by governments and other powerful actors to spread false narratives through groups of commenters or opinion creators online. And this exists throughout the world. Latin America is particularly interesting to look at examples there. Venezuela, it's very transparent, so you actually can see exactly what's happening. In Mexico recently, the protests that broke out after gas prices went up, there was plenty of reporting around that and a lot of reporting around the gasolinazo hashtag. There was also reporting around the saqueo un Walmart hashtag, and that means loot a Walmart. And a number of pictures were sent around depicting scenes of people looting stores. And some of them were real and some of them weren't. And this one got reported by several serious media outlets. Where is this taken? Does anybody have any idea? It's in Cairo. It was not taken in Mexico. Okay, but that's not just whoops, someone got it wrong. That data scientists that we work with in Mexico actually did something kind of similar to what Sorosha's been working on and took a ton of tweets, made a big map, and they noticed actually that the saqueo un Walmart hashtag seemed to be inserted unnaturally into the conversation, and that accounts that were tweeting it actually are linked to narratives that seem to correspond to a pro-ruling party narrative, and that have been, these accounts also have been used to attack journalists and human rights defenders. So that's my story. Talking to people is really important, and we're nice. That's a group of us hanging around in the Philippines, and so please just, get in touch, and we're happy to work together. Yay.